Greetings to everyone. It's 2 o'clock, so I think we're going to get started. My name is Rob Altamont, and I'll be your moderator for today's Hireko webinar titled The Principles of Soft and Hard Stepping Golf Shafts. The webinar will be led by Hireko's Technical Director, Jeff Summitt. Jeff has worked in all facets of club making and repair since 1984 and has devoted the past 20 years to researching, testing, and analyzing thousands of different golf shafts. He's compiled his findings and research into the Dynamic Shaft Fitting Index, which is featured in the best-selling book, The Modern Guide to Club Making, and Total Club Fitting in the 21st Century. Additionally, he has authored the annual Dynamic Shaft Fitting Addendum, which instructs club fitters in the proper fitting and selection of shafts. Both books are available for sale online at hirekogolf.com. Let me get a few housekeeping items out of the way first. Your audio settings are muted, which means we cannot hear you. And if you have any questions, use the question box located in the upper right-hand corner of your dashboard. And if for any reason you must leave the webinar, don't worry, it is being recorded and will be on youtube.com/HirekoGolf and on our blog in about 1 hour. The very last slide that Jeff shows you will have these addresses on there too, these web addresses, so that you can check out the recorded blog. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Hireko Golf's Technical Director, Jeff Summitt.
Thank you, Rob, and thank everyone for attending this webinar. Now, most of our webinars in the past have been pretty lengthy, have come close to filling the entire hour with content. But we're going to try a little something different today and touch upon more of a bite-sized subject. Our topic today is regarding the principles of soft and hard stepping golf shafts. This is probably not something that's commonly taught, or you might not even have heard of this process before. But the concept is a way of altering flex. During this webinar, I'm going to explain why and what type of ramifications occur by soft and hard stepping. Now, these terms apply mostly to taper tip shafts, or taper tip iron shafts to be specific. But the concept can also be applied to parallel tip shafts in general, as I'm going to explain a little bit later. I should give you a little background on taper tip shafts. For one, the entire component industry works exclusively with parallel tip shafts. So when we talk about taper tip steel shafts, it's going to come up only in repair or retrofitting of existing name brands, Proline, irons, or wedges. Now, taper tip shafts come in various lengths, with each length designated for a specific club head. The only example that doesn't is the Apollo hump due to its unique geometric profile. This chart illustrates all the various taper tip shafts that Hireko stocks. The left-hand column shows each club in the set, with the body of the chart showing what lengths are suggested by the manufacturer for each pattern of shaft. The reasoning for the various lengths is the flex is built into the shaft by the manufacturer to correlate with the club head's weight and the length it's most commonly going to be built to. We'll see why in the next slide. One of the first things you should see by examining the chart is each shaft pattern has different various lengths, and those lengths aren't the same from one shaft pattern to another. Plus, some shafts are designed for 1 and 2 irons, which basically don't exist anymore. Plus, in some patterns, the wedge shaft is the same as the 9-iron, and in other sets it's shorter. When you look at the rifle column, you'll see that the lengths are going to vary. This is due to the fact that these are frequency calibrated. So the lengths from, say, one 6-iron to the next 6-iron could be off as much as a ½ an inch in length. They're installed into identical heads by butt trimming and building to the same swing weight and length. The flex will end up being identical. In this case, the rifle shafts are ordered by the club head number rather than the length. The tip to first step dimension on each raw shaft is the major reason why the flex is built into the shaft. This dimension is proportionally shorter by a ½ inch as each shaft decreases in length almost if it was pre-trimmed by the manufacturer. The beauty of this is it saves one additional step in the assembly process, which is tip trimming. This diagram shows what a typical set may look like when you buy them. In this case, we start out with a 40-inch raw length for the 3-iron and goes down to 36.5 inches for the wedges. As I said before, each length is suggested by the manufacturer, so this would be the length you would normally order for the True Temper GS 85 or 95 shafts. A Dynamic Gold or a KBS Tour may require totally different lengths for the same 3-through pitching wedge. If you look from the butt end down to the first step, the shafts are going to look identical. It's only the tip section that determines the flex. Now, the negative aspect of taper tip shafts is it requires the club maker to carry a greater amount of stock keeping units than they would in parallel, or I should say, unitized tip shafts. Therefore, taper tip shafts are geared more for mass-produced pro-line OEM clubs. You won't see them in box sets or in some of the manufacturer's game improvement models. Let's look at the definitions. First off, soft stepping refers to the assembly practice of choosing a longer than normal raw length taper tip shaft for the club head than suggested by the manufacturer. It's for the purpose of achieving a stiffness that's more flexible than the shaft was designed to be. It could also be a term to describe the practice of trimming less from the tip than required in the shaft installation process for that same purpose of achieving a more flexible shaft than it was designed to be. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Hard stepping is just the opposite. It refers to the assembly practice of choosing a shorter than normal raw length shaft for a club head than suggested by the manufacturer for the sole purpose of achieving a stiffer flex than what it was designed to be. It can also be a term just to describe the practice of tip trimming more than required in the installation process for the purpose of creating a stiffer shaft than designed. Now, a question you guys probably already have is, why would a club maker soft or hard step a shaft? Well, there could be a number of reasons. For starters, let's say a customer hit a particular shaft. Let's say the R flex in that pattern was too flexible and the stiff flex was a bit too stiff. The customer might actually require an in-between flex. Maybe the club maker is trying to create a flex that doesn't exist. At this moment right now, there aren't any A or senior flex taper tip steel shafts. If a customer wanted one or something softer than traditional R flex, this would require the club maker to rebore the hosel to accommodate one of the many parallel tip shafts that's readily available. You might not get a true senior flex, but at least you can get close. And lastly, you may be trying to match the frequency of a previous set. For example, you may be trying to take a Dynamic Gold X100 and achieve the same frequency as a Project X 6.5. It's important to remember that one shaft labeled S-Flex may be completely different from another model, even if it's within the same brand. This is what makes the shafts play differently. Now take a look at the chart for a second. As we mentioned before, taper tip shafts receive no tip trimming at all, but require the club maker to purchase a specific raw length for each head. For example, if we wanted a taper tip shaft for a 3-iron, we would normally select the 40-inch raw length if we're working with Dynamic Gold. If we wanted to soft step once, we would take the shaft for the 2-iron or the 40.5-inch raw length in the Dynamic Gold pattern and place that in the 3-iron. What this is going to do is make the club more flexible because the tipped first step length is a ½ inch longer than the 40-inch version. The extra ½ inch is going to be removed when we butt trim the shaft. It's important to remember, though, that the butt diameter is larger than the tip diameter, making it stiffer. So by adding more to the tip section and reducing the length of the butt section makes the shaft more flexible. Now, by soft stepping once, this makes the club about 3 CPMs lower in frequency. In some patterns, it may be as much as 4. If we soft step 2 lengths, or use the 41-inch shaft, which is suggested for the 1-iron, and put that in the 3-iron, this would make the club play approximately 6 CPMs lower than the recommended shaft length. Now, most in the industry regard 10 CPMs or 10 cycles per minute as a whole flex. So you can see the kind of magnitude the effect of soft stepping has on final flex. We're looking at quarter of a flex to soft step once, and maybe a little bit over a half flex for doing it twice. As I said before, we're trying to match, if you're trying to match shaft flex amongst different shaft patterns, for example, a dynamic gold S300 might be the equivalent of a rifle 5.8. But by soft stepping once, you can achieve something closer to a 5.5 flex. And soft stepping twice will create approximately a 5.2 flex. On the wedges, you could elect to do use the same raw length as the 9-iron, or you can make them progressive for greater control, like I've shown in this slide. Again, hard stepping is just the opposite. What you would do is choose a shorter raw length shaft to make the club stiffer. We might take the shaft of the 4-iron or the 39.5-inch raw length in dynamic gold and place that in the 3-iron, essentially making it 3 CPM stiffer. Now, I do have one word of caution regarding hard stepping. It's going to be very difficult to do a full set because you're eventually going to run out of raw lengths. Look at those entries as indicated in orange in that in the second column. You'll see that these are still the same 37. We don't have, in dynamic gold, there is no 36.5-inch raw length. You don't have this problem when you soft step because golfers rarely carry a 1 or 2-iron. But in this case, you run out of lengths. But there is a solution here. If these were dynamic gold S300s, hard step once, like in the middle column, you might be able to take the dynamic gold X100 and soft step twice for the 9-iron and wedges to try to match up the set. And again, if we look at the 38-inch raw length, that was for the 7-iron. This way, you could at least get the frequencies pretty close. Now, these same principles apply to unitized parallel tip shafts or a master shaft that's designed to be used for an entire set of irons or woods. Just because trimming charts say you need to trim a certain amount from the tip doesn't mean you have to. You should already be familiar with the term parallel tip. It's where the tip is made one constant diameter from a certain point, or from the tip up to a certain point. Parallel tip diameters are typically 335 or 350 for woods and 370 for irons. Unitized is probably a term you haven't heard. It describes a shaft in which one shaft could be used to build an entire set of irons, and one shaft could be used to build an entire set of woods through successive tip trimming of the parallel tip section. What unitized shafts allow for is the decrease in the clubmaker's inventory of raw length shafts when building a set of clubs. Now, those two terms are not interchangeable, though. For example, parallel tip rifle shafts are not unitized. True Temper pre-trims the shafts to a specific frequency, so all you have to do is install the shafts and butt trim to length. However, they start out as a master shaft. And you might also see shafts such as True Temper's GS 85 and 95. The parallel versions are all dedicated lengths to allow for their constant weight design. Well, in these cases, these could be soft or hard-stepped, as we outlined in the taper tip shafts. Or there's another option. Now, being parallel tip, you could elect to tip trim the shafts additionally, as there's going to be adequate parallel tip section or tip length to do so, and still allow the shaft to bottom out in the bottom of the bore. Plus, the shafts are generally long enough that you can trim off an extra inch from the butt end to create standard length clubs. Now, if you tip trimmed a ½ inch off each of those raw length shafts, this would be essentially the same as hard stepping once. Tip trim 1 inch more, it would be like hard stepping twice. But whatever you do, be consistent throughout the set. Secondly, as a club maker, you have the ability to cut in between flexes in cases where a person may fall in between two flexes or create additional flexes that don't exist. For example, let's look at the Apollo Phantom R&S iron shaft. This shaft could either be cut to regular or stiff flex by following the recommended tip trimming chart by the manufacturer. On this slide, there's a chart showing what the manufacturer recommends for R-Flex in orange and an S-Flex in black. That's the top chart. Now, you'll notice that there's a 2-inch difference in tip trimming between these two flexes. If we cut the shafts to each of these two flexes in identical heads, lengths, swing weights, etc., we would see a 10 CPM difference. However, let's say we wanted to make the shaft between R and S flex for what some people may call firm. We could trim 1 inch more than the chart for the R flex or 1 inch less than the S flex chart, like what we have labeled on the firm column. We would have confidence that that 1 inch difference in tip trimming would result into a 5 CPM change. Now, as a club maker, you can create even more flexes by applying the same principles of soft and hard stepping. This shaft has nearly 10 inches of parallel tip section, so we have plenty of room to tip trim the shaft more if we wanted to create a stiffer flex or hit a target frequency. And since fewer and fewer customers are carrying 3 and 4 irons, you can create softer flexes by trimming less. Even though the manufacturer may have stated this was a combo regular and stiff shaft, we've actually created 6 flexes out of 1 shaft. Just understand the limitations you have regarding parallel tip length and overall shaft length. You might have to work out on paper ahead of time if you're capable of creating the desired flex that your customer needs. Now, that's a wrap on soft and hard stepping shafts. Now let's turn this back over to Rob and we can field your questions in the time we have left.
Great. Thanks for that presentation, Jeff. You can type your questions into the question box located on the right-hand column in your dashboard there, and we'll be more than happy to help you. If you look at the screen that's up right now, the webinar has been recorded and will be on youtube.com/HirikoGolf and on our blog at blog.hirikogolf.com. So we're ready to take your questions. Just type them in the box. Wait a few moments here. Maybe it'll be a slow day, Jeff. Maybe you answered everyone's questions when you presented.
It'd be a first.
I'm sure somebody has a question. If not, I guess we'll wrap it up, but I'm going to wait a few more minutes because sometimes it takes people to type their questions. Here we go. A couple coming in. Okay, the first question from Cooper. Iron set plus wedges. Do you ignore soft step requirements for wedges?
If we're working with taper tip shafts, sometimes you may not be able to avoid it because of how the manufacturer suggests buying the raw links. But in parallel tip shafts, personally, I have treated the wedges like the 9-iron because oftentimes the wedges are played at less than a full shot, and so that the customer or the player is not going to produce as much force, so it provides a little bit more feel. But that's always debatable. I know our trimming instructions deviate slightly from some of the manufacturers when we print the wedge specifications. I just personally always felt that they should be a little bit softer and allow the extra head weight to offset or the higher swing weight offset the flex.
Next one comes from Scott. Are there general guidelines based on shaft model on how much each step will gain you?
If we're talking on taper tip shafts, soft stepping in general, one length, or hard stepping one length is 3 CPMs. A few of them, I think like Project X, maybe like 4. And those numbers might be just from rounding errors with the frequency analyzer. With parallel tip shafts, it's probably closer to 2.5 CPMs per half-inch, at least in steel iron shafts. In graphite irons, it's hard to say what it would be because it's so dependent upon the materials.
Okay, another one from Cooper. Agree, but I did not. This is about the wedges. Agree, but I did experience a frequency difference between standard and soft step, and then maybe 1 CPM difference. So one could say soft stepping does not get anything for wedges. Agree?
Can you repeat that again?
He says agree, but I did experience a frequency difference between standard and soft step, and maybe 1 CPM difference. So one could say soft stepping does not get anything for wedges.
If it's not, then there might be something else that might be involved there. The 1 CPM, that's almost negligible. That could be the rounding error. That could be like a club where the swing weight's 1 point higher or lower. And sometimes also in wedges, if you're not real careful, if they're from a different set, they're not from like the iron set, oftentimes the bottom of board of ground line measurement is higher on those specialty wedges, and if you don't take that into account in tip trimming, that could also lead to a lower number.
Scott has a few comments on that. I think with wedges it really depends on how much they were tipped to begin with, and he also says a lot of charts call for 9 and up to be tipped the same, so it would take a lot of stepping to see much.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and Bruce has a question. Does hard soft stepping work the same for standard and lightweight shafts? Any difference for steel versus graphite?
No, the same principles apply. The numbers may change slightly, again, depending on the materials, but usually those numbers I threw out, the 3 CPMs, is fairly accurate.
All right, guys, any more questions? Wait a few more moments just in case.
And if you have any questions, you can always email me, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.
A couple of thanks there. Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Cooper. All right, guys, that's a wrap, and we'll be talking to you next month. Thanks again, and everyone have a great weekend. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, guys.